Good evening and welcome to Be Informed. My name is Carl Buhariwala and I've founded Be Informed to help people make good decisions. Today we're looking at business cash flow and we're joined by Brian Teng of Invoice Interchange Australia. Who'll be talking to us about managing late customer payments. Before I proceed, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Today's topic is being presented in Australia, and any particular information contained in today's seminar is general only. So if you do have any specific queries about your personal circumstances or your business circumstances, please do not hesitate to contact a professional such as Brian. In terms of housekeeping, if you do have a question, please raise them through the chat function, or you can message me directly and I will then relay them through to Brian for him to answer during the Q&A session. The seminar itself will go for about 25 minutes, and after that, move into Q&A. Today's session is being recorded, so if you do have to leave early, or if you've just recently joined and you missed a portion of the seminar, you don't have to worry. You can watch the entire session on our YouTube channel later today and moving forward. And Brian has kindly prepared a one-page handout, which will be sent through to registered participants by email. So with that in mind, Brian, I'll hand over to you to take us through the seminar.
Thank you, Carl. All right. Good evening, everyone. As Carl mentioned, Brian Teng from Invoice Interchange. We're a debtor finance or invoice finance provider, and we essentially help customers get their outstanding customer invoices paid up front instead of waiting 30, 60, 90 days to get paid. Today, I will be taking you through the essentials of business management, in particular, how to manage late customer payments. So with that, let's get started with the first slide. So one of the major pain points in businesses, as you would know as a business owner, is the pain of waiting to get paid. And you're not alone. Late payment affects around 90% of all businesses. And this reality is staggering. Almost half, according to Atradius, of all invoices owed to small businesses are paid late. And this approximately costs small Aussie businesses $1.1 billion a year. And late payments means that a business is, especially if you're a small business, you don't have the leverage to demand quicker payments, especially from larger clients. So how does late payment affect businesses? So one of the main things and the direct impact is cash flow disruption. When you get paid late, you might find that your business may not have enough cash to cover day-to-day expenses, essential operating costs such as your rent, meeting your payroll, or even your utility bills. And inconsistent cash flow that is caused by these late payments affects your ability to grow and scale your business. It may even impact you from a debt perspective, which as a business, if you are low in cash or you may not have sufficient cash to meet a particular outgoing or a payment to a supplier, you might have to reach out to banks or financial institutions to take out loans or lines of credit to cover these short-term cash shortages. And in today's high interest rate environment, these sort of borrowed funds can lead to increased financial pressure. And long-term reliance on such form of loans and credit facilities might erode your profitability and might increase your risk of default. Late payments can also impact your ability to capture business opportunities. Without liquidity, a business may miss out on, say, larger orders from your customers or key investment or expansion opportunities. It can also mean an inability to meet your financial obligations, which might impact relationships with suppliers and service providers. Your competitors who have healthier cash flow are better positioned to seize market opportunities. Having late payments or facing late payments may also lead to delayed payments of salaries to your employees or contract staff. And this will impact, obviously, their satisfaction. And with that, it could lead to high turnover or resignations because of the delayed salary payments. And this could result in lower productivity for your business. And ultimately, if all these sort of impacts caused by delayed or late payments comes to head, it could obviously lead to business failure. We all know that many businesses fail not because they lack sales or have bad products, but because they are unable to collect on the sales that they've made in a timely manner. Because cash is king, and cash is the lifeblood of every business. So moving on to the next slide now, let's look at some of the reasons why customers pay late, because it's important to understand some of these, I guess, drivers when it comes to late payment, so as to be able to manage this better. So one of the common reasons that customers provide when it comes to them not being able to make payments on time is that they face financial constraints themselves. And this can be especially true during economic downturns or in a tough trading environment. It could also be because they have complex payment processes, especially when you're dealing with large organizations or large customers. Larger organizations, let's say a Coles or a Woolworths, may have more complex invoicing and payment processes, which means that a small oversight in terms of a particular number or a particular type of information that you need to place on your invoice document may lead to administrative delays. And that's also very much due to the fact that these large organizations have a lot of internal red tape. So if you quote, let's say, a wrong purchase order number, for example, that will lead to the invoice being rejected or not being able to be matched within their payment systems. So that's a very common sort of reason why invoices get missed or is not paid on time. Another reason is that some businesses deliberately delay payments to you because they want to manage their own cash flow better. And by holding on to their money longer, they're essentially using suppliers like yourself as a free line of credit. Sometimes, as a small business owner, we don't have the luxury of being able to demand cash on delivery or much shorter payment terms with these sort of larger organizations. Another reason is misunderstandings about payment terms or the sale that was made or the contracts or agreements surrounding the delivery of the product or the service. When there are these sort of unclear communication or terms, this can obviously lead to delays. So it's very important that businesses have clear agreements or sales agreements, and also follow up on the invoices that they submit to their clients. So let's move on to the next slide. Now that we have looked at some of the main reasons and drivers behind customers paying late, let's look at how we can encourage or not encourage late payments. Essentially, not give your customers a reason to pay late. We want to make sure that we do all we can so that we have the highest chance of getting paid on time or even earlier. So one of the things is to continue to provide exceptional goods and services to your clients. When a business does that, they are essentially making sure that their customer wants you to continue as a supplier to them. They don't want to lose that supply chain because of the quality of products or services that you provide them. And losing you as a customer will disrupt their supply chain. So having great service and products is a simple way to maintain that, I wouldn't say reliance, but the importance of you being a supplier to them, and thus giving them the motivation to pay you on time so that you continue to supply to them. The other way is to have consistency in the way that you bill and invoice your customer. So if your customer expects an invoice at the end of the month or at the turn of the new month, make sure that that happens. And instead of sending them a random invoice on the third week of the month or the middle of the month where they are totally not expecting it and are unable to process or react to that change in the billing cycle. Also, communicate your payment terms clearly upfront to your customers. So make sure that that is absolutely clear, whether it's 14 days, 30 days, 60 days, whether that's net end of month. Leave no room for interpretation when it comes to the payment terms. So this avoids confusion, and they know when they should be scheduling that payment within their payment systems. Build strong relationships with your customers. I know that's obvious, but sometimes in our busy days, we forget perhaps to touch base with our customers every now and then to see how they're going. So we should continue to build and on our existing relationships, and having such strong customer relationships will make your clients more likely to prioritize payments to you when they have these sort of positive working relationships. If there is any form of dispute or on the product or service, make sure that that's addressed quickly. Any form of unresolved disputes obviously will cause delays in payment, not only for the invoice in question, but possibly on other invoices that you might have issued to them that you're awaiting payment for, because some customers freeze all payments when there is a dispute. So it is certainly very important to make sure that any disputes with goods or services provided are addressed immediately. And moving on to the next page, I wanted to also share some tips on how to get paid on time. And as I mentioned earlier, even better, earlier. So one of the things that we have to do is to state clear payment terms on the invoices that you provide to your customers. It is good practice to have some form of an invoicing system. So for example, Xero or QuickBooks, they are able to digitize your invoicing, streamline your invoicing process, and also create automation when it, for example, automatic reminders to be sent before or on due date, and also after the due date if it's late. So these sort of automation reduces obviously time and resources that you need to put in, and also reduces human error. You could also offer your clients multiple payment methods. So don't lock yourself into one particular way of getting paid, by giving your clients more choices or more payment options. For example, paying by credit card, paying by bank transfer, or digital payment platforms like PayPal or Stripe. This encourages them and makes it easier for them to make the payments to you. You could also provide early payment discounts to your customers to pay early. So it's quite common in the market to provide, say, a 1.5% to 3.5% early payment discount, depending on how early your customers pay. However, what is important to note as well is that these sort of early payments in practice does not normally eventuate, just because clients have their own payment cycles, and they follow their own cash flow levels in terms of when they are able to pay, and their pay runs as well. It's also advisable to follow up regularly with your clients when it comes to the approval of the invoices that you've submitted to them, making sure that, number one, they've received the invoice that you've sent them, that there are no issues or with the invoice, and that they have that invoice in their payment system for approval and payment. And you can also follow up regularly with regards to where the status of that invoice payment is. Has it been approved by the first approver, second approver? Has it been scheduled, for example, in a pay run? And you could also ask the date on which that payment is scheduled. So polite but firm follow-up can go a long way in making sure that your invoice is paid on time or earlier. You could also get access to an invoice financing facility. An invoice financing facility will give you the ability to get your invoices paid upfront as soon as it's issued, instead of waiting across the payment terms that you have provided your customer, whether it's 7, 14, 30, 60 day terms. So you get, with an invoice finance facility, it saves you time and resources in chasing your customer for payment, so you can focus on running and growing your business. In fact, a survey by Atreides found that more than 50% of businesses use an invoice financing facility as a main source of financing their business. In the next slide, I will take you through how invoice financing works. So we know that invoice finance provides you funds upfront for invoices that you're waiting to get paid on. You normally receive up to 90% of the invoice value upfront, and your customer continues to pay as per the payment terms stipulated on the invoice or the sales agreement that you have with the customer. So when the customer pays, say, in 30 days time, you will receive the remaining, say, 10% of the invoice value less fees at that point in time. In terms of costs, the total costs of financing an invoice is typically around 2.5% of the invoice value. So the way to look at it from a business point of view is, if you are issuing an invoice to your customer for products or services that you've provided them, and your margin on that particular product or service is, say, 15%, you are paying 2.5% to get that money paid to you straight away upfront, so that you have the cash flow to reinvest in purchasing more raw materials or accepting another project or order from your customer that you might not be able to do if you did not have the cash flow or were still waiting for the invoice to get paid. So that's typically how businesses look at it, especially when it comes to businesses that are growing quickly. The more working capital they have, the more business opportunities they can seize to grow their business. So I think with that, I'll hand it over to Carl.
Thank you,
And
Brian.
if there are any questions, from here on.
Beautiful. No, thank you so much. That was a very clear presentation, and definitely something that businesses need to keep an eye on is their late paying customers. Here's Brian's details. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to him, and he can assist you with your queries. This is a reminder, this session is being recorded, so if you have joined late, you can watch the entire session on our YouTube channel following the session today. And Brian has also prepared a one-page handout which summarizes the contents in the seminar, and that will be sent out through to registered participants by email. So we'll now jump into Q&A, and Brian will start off with some of the questions that we've received ahead of time, and then we can jump into any questions that we've received during today's session. So the first one that we've got, Brian, is in relation to the construction industry, and you probably might have clients that are subject to, I guess, late paying, builders who are, I guess, engaging contractors to, do parts of the work for them in the building industry. Do you see sort of a prevalent issue in your sort of line of work with subcontractors not being paid on time by their head contractors?
Yes, certainly. Since probably late 2022, what we've noticed is that we've started getting a lot of inquiries from the building and construction sector. And a lot of them are tradies or subcontractors who are supplying their labor or materials to the builders, whether they're small builders, medium-sized builders, or even large builders. We've seen an increase in inquiries from these sort of suppliers to them. Some of them have been waiting 9 months. There was one inquiry where that's one of the longest I've heard, and it hasn't really stopped. We've seen that consistent level of inquiries since then. So there's certainly pressure in that sector, and it's very important to ensure that, if possible, get paid a deposit or some form of an earlier payment terms agreed with the builder or the developer when it comes to making or accepting the job or prior to accepting the job.
Yeah. And Brian, do you see the work that you do in supporting businesses, manage the late payments? Does your line of work sort of intersect with the debt recovery industry as well? Do you see many overlaps with the work that they do, or is the work that you guys do quite independent, and you guys can probably resolve most of those issues without having to engage debt recovery advisors?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good question. We work independently, so we don't typically engage debt collectors, because one of the when it comes to accepting clients, we would assess the credibility of both the applicant as well as the debtor that is actually paying the invoice. So our first, I guess, priority when it comes to assessing is what is the probability of us getting paid on that invoice that we're financing. And the objective is to make sure that whatever we finance is paid. and therefore not having to engage, say, a debt collector for any of the invoices that we finance. But having said that, we're in the business of financing, so it's not risk-free. So there will be instances that an invoice faces delays or disputes, or may not even get paid eventually. And in that sort of situation, we might engage a debt collector as a service provider.
Yeah. So Brian, just to understand, just to confirm your business, right? Your business also provides the financing facilities, so you hold the necessary licenses to be able to, provide that financing to your clients who are, of course, being owed money from third parties.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So, with that in mind, why don't we cross over to, I guess, some of the questions we've got in the chat that I've received, or that we can. So, first one is around, does invoice financing, Brian, does invoice financing cover cross-border payments? So if there is, central bank regulations or forex shortages on any cross-border payments, can invoice financing be used as a service to assist with those payment flows?
Short answer for us would be no, because we don't deal with debtors that are in jurisdictions where there are central bank regulations or capital restrictions. So, for example, China, Indonesia, these are certain countries where they do restrict payments to outside of their borders. So we don't do that. But having said that, there are providers out there that do, but not us.
So Brian, if I understand correctly, before you, like any bank, right, that's going to lend money, I guess, you're going to do some diligence on the nature of the transaction, the parties involved, the payment flow. So do you require your clients to sort of provide further information about the nature of the transaction and the parties and the flow to assist you to then think whether or not this is something that your company would finance?
Correct. So any business that is looking for an invoice financing facility with us would need to submit an application, just as they would to a bank if they were to apply for a business loan. So we would ask for certain information and documents for us to do an assessment. For example, their financials, their bank statements, and to your point earlier, very importantly, to try to understand their relationship with their customer who is actually making payment on that invoice. So we would ask for a sample of their past 3 paid invoices so that we know what sort of supporting documentation is required when they issue an invoice to their customer. Because different, as we went through earlier through the side, in the slides, there are, especially with larger organizations, they have their way of receiving an invoice and approving an invoice. So there are certain documents that they require as supporting to actually approve and make that payment to the supplier. So yes, we would ask for some information and documents to understand the applicant as well as their relationship with their end customer.
Thank you. And Brian, just one question that we've received ahead of time was around, does invoice financing facility providers like your company, right, Brian, do you guys require security? So do you securitize certain assets over which you are to the value of the payment that you're going to be financing?
Yes, so there are 2 things that is required as security. One is the personal guarantee of the director. And secondly, we place a security against the company's receivables on the PPSR or the security register.
Yeah, personal property security register. Yep. Okay. And that's the way you sort of then protect, I guess, your risk and your exposure And then another question that we've got, Brian, is just in relation to managing, and it's similar to the questions that have come through in the chat as well. How does your company manage the credit risk and the foreign exchange risk? Sort of what steps do you guys take to manage that, and how would that then impact, I guess, potentially your clients' access to your financing facility?
So by and large, 99% of the invoices that we finance for our clients are domestic-based invoices. So they are supplying goods or services to domestic customers. For example, we were clients that supplying to Coles and Woolworths. Their invoices will be denominated, obviously, in Australian dollars. So we don't have any, I guess, exposure to foreign exchange fluctuations. Having said that, we do have clients that do export to customers that are based overseas. In most cases, these invoices are denominated in US dollars. And we give clients the option to either finance those US dollar invoices in Australian dollars, so it's converted and financed at the Australian dollar equivalent, or we can also finance them based on US dollars. So again, when it comes to that, the client will bear the FX risk if they wish to finance their US dollar invoice in Australian dollars. If they choose to finance in US dollars, then there is no FX risk.
Yeah, that's great to hear, Brian. That was a good response. And another question that we've got is just, and I think we've touched on this, right, in relation to invoice financing. Is it done on a case-by-case basis, or is it more so an annual subscription? I guess, Brian, from what I've understood, you will assess each request on a case-by-case basis. I doubt you guys would have an open or a standing facility with your clients. Is that correct, or do you have the option to sometimes have standing arrangements for like 1 year?
Yeah, good question. And it to answer that question, it's a hybrid of the two that you mentioned. So it's definitely on a case-by-case basis when it comes to assessing each applicant and their customer that they're dealing with. Once we are satisfied that we can provide a facility to that applicant against the invoices of that particular customer, then that facility is an ongoing facility pertaining to that seller-debtor pairing or that relationship.
Right.
The client can obviously add more debtors or customers into the facility, and if they choose to do so, then we again go through the assessment to understand that relationship, and if it's approved, then we can add that to the financing facility. And that facility stays on. It's an ongoing facility, but every invoice that is submitted will need to be reviewed and verified. So going back to the example of our clients that supplying to Coles and Woolworths, we have a standing facility with them for that relationship, and they are constantly supplying goods to, let's say, Coles, and they're constantly issuing new invoices to Coles for the goods that they've provided.
Yeah.
So when they submit these invoices to us for financing, it comes in sometimes on a daily basis, weekly basis, and we would verify these invoices that they submit to us for financing.
Yeah. So Brian, just to understand, we've had a question offline, just more around a bit more technically as to how it works. I mean, you don't have to go into the explicit detail, but say, for example, let's just keep using the example of Coles or Woolworths, and the supplier, supplier of, let's just say, bread, selling it to Coles and Woolworths to then further on-sell through to retail customers. Now that supplier, then initiates an invoice to Coles, $10,000 payable. If they do seek invoice financing, you go through your approval process, and if it's approved, then you will then pay them. Brian, is that correct? You will then pay them an amount discounted by the fee, and then how do you guys then get paid back? Are you paid back via the supplier, or does the Coles pay you directly?
Yeah, great question.
Mm.
So Coles will pay us directly in 60 days. So that's typically what happens. We give the funds upfront to the supplier. Coles then pays us that $10,000. We then settle the financing and then transfer back the balance to the supplier, less the fees.
Right, understood. Okay. So do you then have an arrangement with the Coles as well? So do you have some sort of contractual arrangement with them as well? How do you sort of make sure that Coles will eventually pay you on an invoice, which is ultimately due to, the supplier?
Yeah, correct. So
Mm.
we don't necessarily have an agreement with Coles, but what happens is that the supplier sends a notification to Coles, letting them know that they've assigned the receivables to
Okay.
Invoice Interchange.
Yep.
So essentially, they've assigned the payment to Invoice Interchange, and for them to make payment to Invoice Interchange going forward. So that's essentially what happens.
Yeah. So just to confirm, Brian, just for my understanding and for the understanding of anyone that's watching, listening in the future, that if we take the $10,000 example, when the supplier gets paid up front, do they get the 10,000 or is the 10,000 less the fee?
We provide typically up to 90% of the invoice value upfront, so maximum of 90%.
Right. Okay.
Different industries may have different sort of advance rates, they call them. So, but we never advance 100% of the invoice value upfront. And the reason for that is, number one, there could be dilutions or, for example, credit notes or offsets against the full face value that is eventually paid by the end customer. So if we go back to the Coles example, there could be returns, there could be damaged products, there could be promotional costs or rebates that are offset against the final payment that is made by Coles. So that's why we never advance 100% of invoice value, because there could be a dilution in the payment that eventually comes. So to answer your question, yes, we provide up to 90% of the invoice value upfront.
Right.
Coles in 60 days, assuming that there is no dilution, will pay 100%. We'll pay the full $10,000.
Yeah.
We will then settle that 90% that we had provided upfront in terms of financing, and then transfer the remaining 10% to the customer that they did not receive from us on day one at that point in time.
Yeah. Understood. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, and I think there was another part question that we received, which was, does invoice financing pay before the customer payment due date? And I think we've established that. Ryan sort of explained the flow and the sequence. Another question that we've got, Brian, is around, and this is actually a good question, right? And I've just been thinking about it, is does invoice financing cover cases where the goods acceptance, services acceptance was refused by customer post-delivery? So, in circumstances where you've got, in certain contracts, you might have the acceptance clauses. How do you deal with those issues where potentially, Coles might say, oh, you supplied us the bread, but they were defective, or there were some issues with it, and we're not going to pay you anymore. How does your company sort of manage that risk?
Yeah, good question. And how we manage that is through the advance rate on these invoices that we finance. So different industries have, what they call patterns of payment dilution. And that's where we have the experience, I guess, when we have dealt with clients in many industries to understand what that sort of dilution might look like. And that's why it's also very important for us to look at when a new applicant applies for financing, to look at their past payment history with that particular customer, to understand, first of all, how long it typically takes for these invoices to get paid, the supporting documentation that's required, and obviously any form of dilutions on payments.
Now, that is amazing. No, thank you, Brian. Has provided even me with a sort of an insight into an industry I didn't know too much about. So I hope those that have joined today or those that will watch later in the future have learned something. That brings us to the end of the questions that we have today. Just reminding you of our presenter, Brian Teng, Invoice Interchange in Australia. His details on screen. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to him directly. Just as a reminder, this session is being recorded, and if you have joined late, don't worry, you can watch the entire session on the YouTube channel after today's session. And Brian has prepared a one-page handout which you can then access if you have registered, and I'll send those through by email later tonight. So that brings us to the end of the formalities. Thank you again to Brian for taking the time out of his busy day to present and help you be informed in relation to managing late customer payments. If you did find the session helpful, you may wish to share through word of mouth your interest in it with family and friends, and tell them to follow our social media pages. I run Be Informed and I fund Be Informed myself, and there's no one else, so I try to do the best that I can to deliver good information to those in need, and it's all objective, and we have great support from individuals and businesses like Brian and Invoice Interchange, who support us with sharing great information. So thank you, Brian, and thank you to those that joined, and I wish you all the best and a good evening.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, guys. All right, thank you all. Bye for now.
Bye.